in the name of the triune God, who calls each one of us beloved. Please be seated. It's so good to see you. It's just really good to see you in person. I still haven't gotten used to it after all this time. And no matter what is happening with the pandemic, no matter how many of us can be here or how many are watching online or however we're worshiping, we are still together. And I want to thank you. So, how many of you know what an intervention is? All right, now we're going to do something totally, off, not traditional. Somebody tell me out loud what it is. Really. What's an intervention?
Stepping into someone's life to redirect their steps.
Stepping into someone's life to redirect their steps. And it often happens in the context of what?
Alcoholism.
Right. So, and don't worry, introverts, you will never have to answer those questions. The goal of an intervention is generally to interrupt somebody's habits and thinking enough for them to realize that they need help, right? So at one point in my life, I gathered with a close group to address what to us looked like the alcoholism of one of our loved ones. And we hired someone to help us with this process. He had us each write a letter to our loved one stating how their drinking had impacted us. And when the time came to meet with the person we thought was an addict, we had thought we were supposed to read those letters to her. But what actually happened when we all got there is that the interventionist, having read all of our letters, gently named some themes that he saw in our group that together with the drinking were part of an overall pattern that was stuck. So what we had thought was the goal of the intervention to get our loved one to quit drinking turned out not to be the whole story. The work was not just for the drinker. It was for all of us. It turned out our group had communication and control issues. Who knew? And oddly, I don't know how to explain this, but somehow that released a lot of intensity about the whole situation. We could let go just a little bit of that terrible yearning for the alcoholic to quit drinking, and instead start taking care of what we could control. And with that humility and acknowledging the whole truth and our own part in it, came a certain unexpected lightness and peace. Well, if you're anything like me, you have probably had situations where you truly didn't recognize that what you told yourself about a person or a situation wasn't the whole story. But when we have eyes to see that when it's happening and become open to seeing more deeply, a world of healing and life becomes possible that wouldn't have been otherwise. So in today's gospel reading, Jesus asked his disciples to take a look at the story they've been telling themselves about who he is and about what being a disciple means. Turns out they didn't see things quite clearly. Maybe they thought he'd be the one to overthrow Rome. Maybe they thought a lot of things. What they didn't think is what he told them. And what's interesting is the reading that we have today from Mark's Gospel comes right after another interesting story where Jesus heals a man who is blind, but not all at once. First, Jesus touches the man who is blind, and he looks around and he's like, I see what looks like trees walking around. So they have another go at it, and Jesus touches him again, and then he can see clearly. But seeing clearly happens in stages, not all at once. Similarly, in the reading from today, Jesus is inviting the disciples to become clear about how they're seeing him, but that too doesn't happen at once. It has to happen in stages. They start with considering how other people see Jesus, and then to how they see him, and what it actually means that he's the Messiah. Turns out he's going to have to be rejected, and he's going to suffer and be killed and rise from the dead. Not what was on their agenda. And finally, what it means to be a disciple. Turns out the whole thing seems very upside down. Jesus is the Messiah, but they're not supposed to tell anyone that. And being Messiah is not at all what they thought it would be like. And being a disciple also seems to be confounding. When you try to save your life, you lose it. And when you lose your life for the sake of Jesus and the gospel, you save it. Well, that kind of just sounds like an invitation to a martyr's life, which no one wants. But then Jesus asks a really profound question. What will it profit you to gain the whole world and give up your life? The Greek word for life here could also be translated soul. So imagine Jesus asking, what will it profit you to gain the entire world, but lose your soul? He's not talking about the afterlife here, probably, but about the soulful experience of boundless, eternal, divine life of God here on the earth, in the deepest part of who you are. There is such a thing as having everything and being utterly impoverished. But still, what can Jesus mean by losing your life for the sake of the gospel? How can that be good news at all? In today's world, here we are, September 12th, 2021. We at St. John's have been talking for a few years about being a disciple of Jesus through following the way of love. And if you don't remember, I bet you all remember, but if you don't remember, the way of love is these 7 practices, 7 spiritual practices that show the shape of Christian life. And they are turn, learn, pray, worship, bless, go, rest. See, you didn't remember, it's good. But if we see these way of love practices through the lens of Jesus' teaching in today's gospel reading, it still becomes decidedly less appealing. Almost everybody I know is so exhausted from this pandemic and the endless uncertainty and having to reinvent the wheel to do things we used to be able to do on autopilot, that probably the idea of denying ourselves to give more might not sound like good news at all to anyone. And we're wrestling hard with some things. There's all the stuff you've got going on in your personal lives, and there's also groups at St. John's and out of it that are wrestling with things like public safety in Minneapolis, climate crisis, and on it goes. So in this world as it is, in our lives as they are, what can be good news about Jesus' invitation to deny ourselves and follow him? Well, I think we can start by saying that Jesus is implying things are not as they appear. The story we make up about what life itself is might need some shifting. Here's what I do know. When I have even briefly let go of my own intense desires and narratives about things, and have sought to be open to guidance beyond the best my brain can come up with, there is often, even in the middle of tremendous burdens, a surprising sense of lightness, sometimes even of play, that is good news. I think that this is because there actually is a power greater than ourselves, however we understand that power, who is love, who is accessible to us, and who can guide us if we will relinquish just a little bit of control. Maybe Jesus saying we need to deny ourselves isn't just about being generous, although that's very important. It's not just to consider the needs of others as being as important as our own, which of course is also part of love. It's not just about using our privilege to benefit those who don't have it, or about working hard for things that matter, because those things are part of the cross that we're asked to bear. Perhaps most deeply, though, denying ourselves to follow Jesus means to have a humble acceptance that we don't always get it right, and to know that the more we cling to anything, including not just what we have or try to save or protect, but also our opinions about what's right and our condemnation of those we think are guilty, the less life and joy and freedom we have. Maybe Jesus is asking us to go past the surface of things, even how we usually think about ourselves, and instead touch the deepest part of who we are. The truest part of who we are is that beautiful core God created and called good. The core that overflows with love and generosity when we truly learn to follow Jesus, to follow a genuine spiritual master, a healer, a liberator, and a friend. Perhaps Jesus' teaching to deny ourselves and follow him is about coming from a place of acceptance and openness, even as we engage in the struggles of this world, knowing there's a power greater than ourselves that can offer us guidance and rest and even play. Your wonderful former rector, Mary Ann Budney, who's now the Episcopal Bishop of the Diocese of Washington, D.C., said this in a recent sermon, and thank you, Rex, for pointing it out to me. You should listen to it if you can. She said, "We can live with peace at the center of our being, even as we are called to engage the turbulence of the world." To follow Jesus involves this paradox of peace at the center and engaging the turbulence around us. The peace comes from who Christ is and from our own humble willingness to just be open to the love of God. That love turns things upside down, in which giving and clinging looks like losing, and in which giving away looks like saving. In that love, we can take a deeper look at ourselves and all that is around us. We can let go. We can truly seek the presence of God's Spirit and follow where she leads, to take up our crosses and engage the world around us from a different place. So I don't even have to imagine, I know, we're all very similar in the sense that in any given moment, there are particular things that give us joy and also things or issues in our lives that we're clinging to pretty tightly. Maybe it's a relationship issue or an issue in our society that keeps you up at night, or struggle with health or loss or anxiety, or even your own less than perfect coping mechanisms. Whatever it is, who have you been in this situation? And who do you want to be in it? What might God be inviting you to become? What might it look like to allow our perceptions to be turned upside down, to let go of our normal habits of thinking, to pick up what is in fact ours to carry, and ask for the guidance of God? The answers might involve some change and some letting go, but you might also gain your soul.